Hello, everybody. Welcome to another one of our fantastic Zoom presentations. Um, my name is Cameron Davenport. I'm a board member of the Coalition of American Canyoneers. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm really excited about this presentation. Sergeant Aaron Dick is here from Coconino County, and realizing what a huge county that is, covering what an expansive space. This team has experience and they've seen some stuff. So I'm really looking forward to getting more of that information in the dry run. I learned a lot about just our GPS devices. So it's going to be a good presentation. And these presentations are free, just like joining the Coalition of American Canyoneers. If you go to our website, click on join now, it's free. You get on the email list, you know what's going on. And while you're on there, grab a t-shirt so you get street cred at the trailhead. And then you also help presentations like this. When you purchase our merch, that money goes directly to helping projects in Moab and Hanksville, helping with signage, trailhead registers, working with permits and things like that. So not only will you be awesome looking in your t-shirt, but then you also will really help with access and agencies that really need the help. So thank you again for being here. I'm going to turn it right over to Sergeant Aaron Dick because we have such a great presentation. At the end, we'll wrap up with some questions and go from there. So thank you for being here again, Sergeant Dick.
Thank you. I'm here with two of our team members, so I'll introduce them in a second. But yeah, my name is Sergeant Aaron Dick. I'm the search and rescue coordinator for the Coconino County Sheriff's Office in Arizona. I've been involved with our search and rescue team for about 32 years, 7 years as a volunteer on the team, and the past 25 as a deputy. And the past 20 of those years have been the SAR coordinator role. Um, so I'm less on the tip of the spear anymore and more sitting back and coordinating stuff. So that's why I brought some experts that are actually doing the hard work in the canyon. Introduce Jamie Weleber. He's one of our team members and one of our team leaders on the technical rescue team.
Hey everybody, my name is Jamie Weleber, and I've been on this particular search and rescue team for about the last 7 years. The entire time I've lived in Flagstaff, and prior to that, have kind of bounced around the United States, but have been involved in search and rescue operations and technical rope rescue for about the last 12 years. So,
And then also have Ken Herron, and we're going to talk about an incident that Jamie and Ken were involved in. But Ken's been on the team for
32 years, perhaps. I've been doing technical rescue probably for about the last 20 years or so, and running our technical rescue team, and also doing some work with Mountain Rescue Association on the board and as a regional chair.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Coconino County and the kind of canyon rescue situation we have here. If you're not familiar with Coconino County, we're kind of in the north central part of Arizona. This county covers 18,661 square miles, and so we have a lot of canyons here. So if you've heard of water holes, Paria Canyon, the canyons in the West Fork area, like Illusions and Insomnia, and then canyons in West Clear Creek, and some on the Navajo Nation. Those are all inside Coconino County. Our team responds to about 150 to 160 search and rescue missions per year that require the SAR unit. The county as a whole, we probably get 400 or 500 search and rescue calls for service a year, but a lot of those are handled through our patrol deputies. About 150 to 160 of those, the SAR unit is involved in some way. And of those, only about 2 to 3 of those are canyoneering related calls. And we consider those like the technical canyoneering. We get a lot of calls in canyons, but a lot of them are not, technical in nature. It's just like West Fork of Oak Creek and Paria Canyon. There's not a huge technical component. So these are really only a fraction of our call volume, but when we do get them, they are very manpower intensive and sometimes take a long time to complete. And so we've seen a mix of experienced canyoneers involved, and we've had some cases where people didn't realize they were going to do canyoneering, especially like in water holes, where we've had some foreign tourists who get some information that they want to go down there, and it might require a rope, and they go to the hardware store and buy a yellow braided rope, and then they get into some trouble. So there maybe would be canyoneers, but they don't have the appropriate equipment or training. And then we've had several incidents that we're solo canyoneers, and we think that maybe a small group is safer, but I guess that's up for discussion. So some of our missions, canyoneering missions average about 12 hours, but we've had a couple that have lasted, 20 or 30 hours to complete the operation. So when we looked at some of our canyoneering incidents, we kind of have grouped them into these 4 categories. We occasionally get overdue canyoneering group reports from a third party that the group has not come out or they're not able to reach them. The majority of them are injury related, that we get a notification from the party themselves. And we've had some stranded canyoneering parties that had like an equipment issue and are stuck in the canyon. And then we have a handful of them are miscommunication where it was they intended to do one canyon, but maybe they got there and the situation wasn't great and they did something else, but didn't communicate back to a trusted person back home. And then there was really no emergency, but just a miscommunication. So when we get these calls, this is kind of the incident flow for us, is we get some kind of notification, and we'll talk about a couple of different ways we get the notifications. But once we get the notification, we spend a little bit of time gathering intelligence about what's going on, who's involved, where are they, what canyon are they doing, the weather there, what kind of equipment is needed. And we start to develop, both a ground-based option and an aviation option, and thinking about those things. And then we call out our mountain rescue team and figure out, to get the right complement of personnel to go do the operation. Then we make a land management agency notification, because a lot of times the canyons that we're dealing with are in federally designated wilderness, and we anticipate some kind of wilderness incursion. And so we're coordinating with the land management agency to make sure that we have the permissions to do that. Then we get on scene and implement our plan, and we always have some contingency plans in case our initial plan doesn't work out. And then once the incident is over, we do some kind of after action review, on the scene, or maybe a more formal one back at our office after a day or two to try to capture any lessons learned about how things went. So that photo on this slide is probably the biggest technical canyon rescue that I've been involved in managing. Was the Insomnia Canyon Rescue. I think it was in 2011. There were a couple of articles written about it. One is in Firefighter Nation. There was another one in the MRA Meridian newsletter. And that one presented a lot of challenges, because we didn't, at that time, we got a call that they were in Insomnia. It's not a map name. It took us a little while to figure out where this was. And then it was just a pretty technical operation to send personnel through the canyon at night in a monsoon season, and then move the patient to a place where we could do a helicopter operation the next day. So all in all, that operation took a little over 30 hours to complete. So I mentioned we'd talk about a little bit notification and communication, and we get a lot of our notifications about an emergency in the canyon from the canyon party themselves, and most of those are done via some kind of satellite device. But things in the canyon, communications are difficult in the canyon, and cell phones are definitely unreliable. So like I said, we generally get satellite equipment is used to make the report, or we've had cases where a member of the group completes the canyon, hikes out, and makes a report to us. But these are a couple of satellite devices that are out there. One is the Garmin InReach. It's similar to the Spot or a Zoleo, and the other one is the PLB. And we'll talk a little bit about the differences between those two devices and like pros and cons of both. But the satellite emergency notification devices like the InReach or the Spot are relying on low Earth orbit satellites, and so this presents just understanding what's going on with them can be helpful. Like the Iridium satellites are in a polar orbit, so if you're in an east-west oriented canyon, you may have a little bit of difficulty, or there's a delay in seeing a satellite. Globalstar satellites, which is what Spot uses, and the Apple SOS are not quite in a polar orbit. That's the lower image on this slide. but they're a little bit higher and is also kind of relying on some timing for that satellite to come into view in our experience. So there's, like I said, there's the send device and the PLB, the person locator beacon. And the advantage of the send device is that it has two-way communications capability. So the canyon party can send a message, they can receive a message that helps us get a little bit better information about what's happening on scene. It does require a subscription, a monthly subscription, and then there's the SOS feature with it. So if there's an incident, you can activate the SOS function of the device. That's managed by a private call center. So in the case of the inReach, it's the Garmin call center. They get the notification, and then they generally look at where's the closest public safety answering point, which is just a 911 center, and contact that agency to report the SOS activation. We're going to get a link from Garmin so that we can communicate directly with the party, and that's really helpful for us to be able to gather some more information about what's happening at the scene. The personal locator beacon doesn't require a subscription. You buy it, and then you have to register with NOAA, and you should include an emergency contact, and you can update on the registration page the activity that you're engaged in at any time. But the disadvantage of this device is there's no two-way communication. So you can activate the SOS feature, but we don't know what the emergency is. The nice thing about the SOS feature is it's governed by a very formal memorandum of understanding and memorandum of agreement between the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center and the states. So the signal is, like in Arizona, the way it works is the Air Force would contact the state SAR coordinator. The state SAR coordinator will look at and see where those coordinates are and notify the county. And then the county SAR coordinator is responsible for implementing the response. The other thing with the PLB is that there's a low power homing signal on 121.5 megahertz, and we have some equipment that we can try to locate that signal with if we didn't get great GPS location information. So we're going to show this slide. We'll show it again in a second. We talk about a particular case, but this was an incident last year where the initial activation or initial notification to us about a canyoneering accident was from a PLB. We had a PLB go off. The Air Force contacted the state contacted me, and we knew we had the PLB. When we looked at the coordinates, it was in Horse Tank Wash. We knew that to be a technical canyoneering route. Contacted the emergency contact listed on the beacon and registration, and they said, we have a party, the owner of that beacon is part of a party that's doing a technical canyoneering route. And so we had a pretty good idea of there could be some kind of a fall injury here. So we were gearing up for a technical canyoneering type rescue. Shortly after that initial notification, we got a Garmin notification. And what had happened is there had been a fall, and the person that fell had the Garmin inReach. It was damaged in the fall, and on the screen it displayed that there was damage. So they weren't sure if the message was sent, so they fired off the PLB. But ultimately, we ended up getting both alerts, and we were able to communicate a little bit with the Garmin to understand that there was a leg injury, and have a little bit more information about how many people were on scene there. The other way we're getting notifications about canyoneering incidents is just a third-party notification. So this relies on somebody leaving a detailed trip plan with a trusted person, and if they are overdue, that person is contacting the sheriff's office to report the incident. And the way this is really successful is if people know leave the name of the route and some map information, because many canyon names are not map names. And that was the case for us with Insomnia. Is when we got their initial report, I wasn't familiar with that canyon, and it took a little while of researching. And I think I might have called Todd Martin and found his phone number on the internet somehow and asked him about it and got some information about that particular location. So leaving a map would be really helpful, is really helpful for us to understand where this incident is occurring. Also, leaving the source of the canyon information, like what information is this party relying upon? That way we can look at that same information and understand what equipment they probably are carrying with them. The location of the parked vehicle is important, so we can verify, yeah, these people are still at the canyon, or if the vehicle's gone, maybe there's, they lost their cell phone battery and they've left the area and that's maybe not an emergency. Where they're going to enter the canyon, where they're going to exit the canyon, the check-in times that they are planning to achieve, how many people are in the party, and the equipment. Is all important information if you're going to leave that behind with a trusted party, so we have the best information possible. So I'm going to turn over to Jamie to talk about kind of our in-canyon operations and kind of the tip of the spear part of the canyon rescue.
All right. So yeah, I'm going to be talking with you guys about the challenges that we face conducting rescues in the canyon environment. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about kind of exists on a spectrum. And so some of us on this call are involved in search and rescue operations and have been on teams for a while. But I'd wager to guess that a lot of us have no experience with search and rescue operations, in particular in a canyon setting. So thinking about this as like a recreational canyoneer, if you remember one thing from this slide in like the 5 to 10 minutes I'm going to talk with you about is the cooler the canyon is in general, the harder the rescue is going to be. And what I mean by that is some of the things that we think about as recreational canyoneers that provide a lot of value and get us really excited to run a particular route are some of the same things that provide challenge for us as rescuers. So examples could be the remote nature of a canyon. It could be way off in the wilderness, away from roads with really long access routes and exit routes. It could have incredibly deep gorges, high canyon walls. It could have narrow slots where you're like thinking thin and turning sideways and can't wear a pack and getting through canyon sections like that. It could have water, and that can either make it more fun or more challenging and difficult. It can also be the sheer number of rappels that are in a canyon and the height of those rappels. I saw a few folks on this meeting that I believe are proudly representing Death Valley. And if you think of some of the big canyons in Death Valley that have 20 plus rappels, well, that's if we can't do something like a rescue operation with a helicopter, that's 20 some odd rope operations we have to do to get someone out of a canyon. So we'll say it one more time. In general, the cooler the canyon is, the harder the rescue is going to be. And that takes shape in a couple different ways. And the first is just locating where the incident has occurred. So in particular, when you've got deep gorges, narrow slot canyons, and the type of topographic features which provide those really dramatic views and senses of isolation when you go into a canyon, they don't generally play well with electronics. And so you can think of this, the technical name is like a GPS multipathing, but it's just the signals from space start bouncing off of stuff before they reach you. And so what that means is that when we get a location from like a send device or a PLB, we may not get the most accurate location. And if you ever have like a Garmin watch or an Apple Watch and you're recording your track as you go through a canyon, you might see that where all of a sudden it's in the route and then all of a sudden it drops a point 100 yards away or a couple hundred yards away. That can happen to us as responders where we actually don't know your location because of the topography of that canyon. Also, if you've ever been in a really narrow slot canyon and it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's a bright sunny day and you're like, wow, we've been using our headlamps for the last hour. That means that visibility from the air is going to be really difficult to see down into that canyon as well. So whether we have drone pilots or a helicopter, our ability to look down into a canyon can be severely limited, which might mean that our only option is to actually run the canyon to actually discover where you are and what the nature of your injury or situation may be. And that leads us right into Our next point of access. So Aaron did mention that oftentimes these are in wilderness and there are specific protections around wilderness. And oftentimes land managers will give us exemptions from some of those wilderness protections, but they don't have to. And there have been times when we've reached out to a land manager and we're like, we would like to do a helicopter operation. There's technical terrain. And they ask what the nature of the injury is, and maybe it's a twisted ankle. And that doesn't necessarily rise to the level of something that would require helicopters. So if we say we can do it on the ground, they would prefer to do it on the ground. So being in a wilderness area can make access more challenging. Again, cooler the canyon, the more difficult the rescue. That plays strongly into the terrain. And so the terrain produces a lot of challenges. The narrower the canyon, the steeper the drops, the taller the walls, the higher the number of the rappels, the taller the rappels, the more difficult our operations get. And that bullet point that says requires special equipment, and this is actually maybe a little bit different than you guys may be thinking. Some search and rescue teams, they have like subspecialties where they may have like a specific dedicated canyon response team or a cave response team. But a lot of the search and rescue teams in the American Southwest, and ours is no different, we come from a background of mountain rescue. And so the more canyony, the higher the walls, the more narrow the terrain, the more dissimilar it is from a lot of the terrain we've developed our mountain rescue systems for. And so when I say special equipment, I'm not necessarily saying like we've got to have like the latest whiz bang winch. I'm just saying we may need things that are not our typical mountain rescue equipment cache, and we need to adapt to the constraints of operating in a canyon environment. And then that bullet point that says helicopters may not always be a viable resource, that's really big. When helicopters can be utilized, that's excellent for rescuers, and it's excellent for the subject. When it works fast, it works well, it gets people out, and it's one of the easiest ways we can get something done. And it's not without risk, but when we can do it, I think we're all really happy about that. When a helicopter is not an option, that's where the clock starts to tick, and it's going to start ticking for a while. And so we're going to have, as rescuers, extended patient contact times. And from a recreationalist perspective, oftentimes we pack our bags anticipating 8 hours in the canyon or 12 hours in the canyon. And those of us that are really well prepared, we may bring a headlamp and extra food and water and, like a jacket if we're going to be out later overnight. But with a rescue, that could stretch to not just overnight, but the next day. And we will bring supplies, we'll bring food, we'll bring water, we'll try to bring warm-up gear. But I just want people to be aware that if like a helicopter is not an option to solve things fast, generally, as Aaron had said, 12 and a half hours is an average, but we've had some in this county that have gone over 30 hours. And so just keeping that in the back of your head when you're packing and deciding like, should I bring this little tiny like bivvy? Yes, no. It's your call based on that risk assessment. And then as rescuers, again, the cooler the canyon, generally the harder it is to move people through a canyon. Think about like Peekaboo up in Utah and some areas that are really narrow slot canyons. It can be difficult to get through with a backpack. And then try to imagine multiple people trying to get someone through a canyon on a litter if they required that due to an injury. And so that kind of hints at and underscores how resource intensive that is from a workforce perspective for rescuers to be able to get people through canyons in that way. It gets very, very difficult. The next bullet point is changing conditions. And anchors may seem like an interesting one to put onto that list. But what I wanted to talk with you about anchors as it relates to rescue is just that it's different. And so, in the canyoning or canyoneering community, anchors are a perennial topic of conversation. To bolt or not to bolt. Is webbing good? Is webbing bad? Are rock cairns a low impact way to get through a canyon, or are they a death trap waiting to happen? There's all sorts of debates that can happen about the best way to be able to get through a canyon and do it in a low impact, sustainable way. That is robust conversation that happens for just single person rappelling. And so when we think about the anchors we're designing for just canyoneering on a recreational scale, That's what those anchors are designed for. When we come through with a team of people and more gear, and we potentially have to have multiple people on an anchor, and we may not just be going down, we may be lifting people back up those pitches and using mechanical advantage. What we need from an anchor is different. And so the impacts of us moving through a canyon may be different. And so we just wanted to draw attention to that. Another changing condition that is always kind of in the back of my mind is water. In the Southwest, whether it's in the spring or it's in monsoon season in the summer and early fall, we've got big catchment basins that can hold a lot of water and then funnel it down into really, really narrow, tight spaces. And oftentimes it doesn't really work well when humans and rushing water try to occupy that same space. And that's something that can compound a rescue operation as well, because from a rescue perspective, we don't necessarily want to put more people into harm's way if those conditions exist. So that's something else we have to contend with. And then that last bullet point for environmental conditions, that is my cue to try to relate some canyons to another really extreme, austere environment, and that would be like caves. And so when I took my first cave rescue class, one of the first things that was said to me, and this isn't true for all caves, but for a lot of caves, when you go into the cave, it's already trying to kill you. And the killer is oftentimes hypothermia. And so when you think about some of the narrow, dark areas we go to in canyoning that have cold water, we can only sustain our core body temperatures for so long in those conditions. And so cold water, low overnight temperatures in the Southwest, we sometimes have 50 plus degree temperature swings between daytime highs and nighttime lows. So hypothermia is an ever-present threat as well. And that's just another thing we try to contend with. And we wanted to bring up as a point for recreational canyoneers to keep in the back of their mind as well, is if you're going to do a cold water canyon, it could be as simple as you run into another group and you're stuck in a pool for 20 minutes longer. Are you ready to deal with that? Is your wetsuit thick enough? Do you need to upgrade to a dry suit with more stuff underneath? So those are some of the challenges we run into when we're conducting canyon rescues, and other teams I'm sure run into that as well. So I'll pass it back over to Aaron.
And I remembered a point that I wanted to make after a discussion we had yesterday on the dry run, and it's kind of related to the GPS and these devices. Both the send device and the PLB have a GPS in it, and that's why we're getting most of our location information about where the alert is happening. But it is possible that the device does not get a GPS fix in a narrow canyon, but the emergency message gets out. So with the send device, it could get the emergency message out to the Garmin, to the Iridium satellite or the Globalstar satellite, but there's no location information. And so we can know that there's an emergency, but we don't know where it is. That's where an emergency contact is really helpful in updating that emergency contact with what your plan is. Same with the PLB. I remember talking to a friend of mine who was a ranger at Zion quite a while ago, Kevin Killian, and he did some experiments with the PLB in some of the canyon country there, and the 406 signal got out to the SARSAT constellation, which is what the PLBs work on, but no location information. So it's really important to remember, even if you have one of these devices, leave a good trip plan with somebody so that if you set it off, we don't get great location information, we can at least talk to that emergency contact and find out what canyon you were in or what your plan was, so that we have a better idea where we need to go. So then we talk about just two relatively recent incidents, and then later, if there's questions about incidents that happened here, we can try to answer those too. But last summer, we got this incident occurred in Horse Tank Wash Canyon, and like I said, we got a PLB alert from the Air Force around 2:00 in the afternoon, and we contacted the emergency contact on the PLB registration, learned that it was a group that was doing a canyoneering trip. So immediately we're thinking about what the possibilities are, trying to gather some information about that canyon. We had done other rescues in that canyon, so we had a little bit of information about, what was going on there. And, starting to call out our mountain rescue team that within our unit, our mountain rescue team is the one that does the technical rope rescue. Shortly after we got that PLB alert, we got the notification from the Garmin Emergency Response Coordination Center, and they reported an inReach SOS activation, and they indicated at that time that there was a fall injury with a broken leg, and that the subject was requiring rescue. So we had started our response. The mountain rescue team was en route to that location. We also requested assistance from the Arizona Department of Public Safety, which is our state police, with their air rescue helicopter. And Ranger 1 is a Bell 429 with a hoist-equipped aircraft. And they're able to do both daytime and nighttime hoist operations. So we requested them for a potential helicopter hoist rescue. They got in the area about a little like 2.5 hours later, located the party by air, and did some power checks to determine if they could do the hoist. And it was a warm day with some wind. And at that time, they just did not have the performance to conduct a hoist operation. So they landed at the command post. We talked about what the possibilities were, and they were going to go down to Payson, shut down, and wait for later in the evening when things got cooler and we expected the winds to die down, and they would be ready to give it another try, like after sunset. So we had gathered information from RopeWiki about the canyon just to have some beta for rescue planning. Got an incursion permission from the Forest Service for that wilderness area for the helicopter rescue. And then we were trying to evaluate, were there any mid-canyon access points? And the purpose of that was to try to see if we could cut off the time to get to the patient. And it just didn't work out. We looked at a couple of places, wasn't going to make sense for us to try to do that. And so we knew that if we ended up not being able to do a helicopter operation, that it would be a pretty manpower intensive operation in the canyon to move this patient through the remainder of the canyon and out to the exit. So we requested additional rescuers from Tonto Rim Search and Rescue, which is in Gila County, and Maricopa County Sheriff's Office Mountain Rescue down in the Phoenix area to respond. So we had a bigger pool of technical personnel. So here's that map again. This is like the PLB location and then the updated send location. The send location was much closer to the actual location there of the patient and kind of where we were kind of mid-canyon there. So there was a couple more rappels to do below where the patient was. And so we were starting to plan starting to get ready to put people in the canyon. Then the helicopter came back after sunset, and air temperature was much cooler. Winds had died down, and they were able to do a nighttime hoist. Brought the patient into the aircraft, flew to Payson, transferred to a private EMS helicopter, and that patient was flown down to Phoenix for treatment. The uninjured party members elected to continue through the canyon, and we just checked in with them later the next day to make sure that they had made it out. But this incident was featured on the PLB manufacturer's website about how the PLB and inReach kind of worked together in this case. So it's kind of a good illustration of maybe why it's a good idea to maybe carry both types of devices. The next incident, both Jamie and Ken were involved with, and this was a recreational day, a canyoneering party, 4 members total, Jamie and Ken, and then 2 other members. And they all have canyon and technical rope rescue experience and a lot of medical experience. And this was in Illusions Canyon, so this is June 8th. In the canyon, Ken had a kind of mid-canyon slip while trying to slide into a pool and sustained a broken foot. And the rest of the party came up to assess the injury and initiated a message using the inReach to advise of the accident. And Jamie's partner texted me and said, "There's been an accident. I think they're going to need rescue." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And the answer was yes. And so then we kind of coordinated with my partners, my other SAR coordinators that work with me to manage the incident. but there were long delays in the messages being able to be sent out from the inReach, and the incoming messages being received by the inReach, just because of the nature of that canyon and the it's kind and how much sky view was there. So I'll let these guys fill in whatever I missed here, but they weren't sure that the message had gotten out, um, and when we sent a message back to them saying we were responding and this is what our plan was, it was delayed getting there. So they made the decision to try to continue moving down canyon, knowing that there's a better location for extraction down canyon instead of where they were, where the incident occurred. And this was no easy feat. Ken had to finish the canyon. He finished all the canyon by doing 5 additional rappels and multiple swims with this pretty unusable foot injury. And they got to an area where the helicopter rescue would be much easier. And if that wasn't going to work out, a ground-based response would be much easier. We had requested DPS air rescue again, Ranger 1 against the hoist-equipped aircraft out of Phoenix. They arrived in the area, and visibility in the canyon is difficult, but fortunately Ken had brought his search and rescue radio, and they were able to get on the same frequency that we use with the aircraft. And I think the crew on the aircraft was a little surprised to hear from the canyoneering party, but it was pretty essential to coordinate, vectoring that aircraft into where they were ready for pickup, and the hoist rescue was conducted there. So this is a photo of the hoist about to happen. And it's a good reminder for us that even if we have a search and rescue shirt on or something like that, we don't have this cloak of invincibility. Incidents can happen to even the best trained personnel on a good day with all the right equipment. And so it's just thinking about how we're going to respond to these incidents is really, really important. So the skills of the party, they had the right medical gear. They had some emergency gear to take care of that, an extended period in the canyon. Really made the difference in making this a relatively easy incident to manage. Interestingly, the very next weekend, a week later on a Sunday, we had another canyoneering accident in Illusions in roughly the same location, which required another hoist rescue. So we've decided that maybe nobody should run Illusions on a Sunday. So if you're thinking about it, just consider that. Do you guys want to chime in on any issues about the canyon rescue?
I think you covered that pretty well. The only thing I would add to that is the accident happened just after rappel 7. There's 12 rappels in the canyon. After we got to rappel, there's an area in the canyon that is actually dry canyon, where we thought that we could have an extraction, and that's where we decided to fire off our emergency messages, thinking that that would be a really good place for extraction. We de-geared, we got into warm clothing, and we were prepared to wait there for our help to arrive. And we did not hear anything back on our end, so we weren't sure if anybody was coming. So we were sure that we got the one message out to notify that we had an incident, but we never heard anything back. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon. We still had 2 rappels ahead of us and a swim in a very narrow area of the canyon. So we weren't sure staying there would have been necessarily a good idea. So that's when we decided that we would re-gear and try and run the rest of the canyon so we could get to a spot that we would at least have the canyon behind us. So in that case, if a ground-based rescue was the only option, we were at least out of the canyon at that point. The big concern that we had that Aaron had pointed out, the last 2 rappels, you're not visible from the air. And what we didn't want to happen is we didn't know anybody was coming, but we didn't want to be in the middle of that section and have the helicopter show up and then them be not able to spot us and then turn around and leave. So it was fortunate that we had our radio with us, which is what happened. We were actually in that narrow section when the helicopter showed up, and we heard them flying above us. So we were able to get on the radio and make contact with them. So they knew we were there. They gave us the time that they could spend on station and how long it would take us to get out. And so it kind of all worked out. But it was the fact that we had a message out, but we didn't have anything coming back that elicited some of those decisions that we made to re-gear and continue on with the canyon.
That kind of leads us into some Canyoneer preparedness and things we think that would be important to be thinking about prior to going into a canyon. One is getting a good updated weather forecast. So you may be planning a trip for this coming weekend, let's say, and you're looking at the weather today and everything looks like it's going to be fine. But we really want people to be thinking about, within 24 hours or less, getting an updated weather forecast for that period of time. And just thinking about that, I've been looking at the weather for Arizona for this upcoming weekend, and we were anticipating some tropical storm moisture coming in and maybe some pretty significant rainfall. So if you're thinking about doing a canyon in Arizona this weekend, just really pay attention to that for sure. Then making some risk management considerations, considering the composition and experience of the group. And do you have the right complement of people there? And one of the things I like to think about on all sorts of rescue operations is there a risk for a skill-based error or a complacency-based error? And I'll talk about like a way to kind of sort that out. But we want people to be able to make a good go, no-go decision. And so a lot of people, not just in canyoneering incidents, but mountaineering, backcountry skiing, things like that, will have planned the trip for a long time. They've been anticipating it for a long time. They may have spent money to get to this location to do what they're going to do. And when they arrive, the situation is not that great. The weather's not right, or they've had some equipment problems or something like that. But because they've made some kind of financial and emotional investment in doing it, they press on anyway. This is a good reminder that the canyon will be there another day. So if you get there and just things don't feel right, the weather's not great, you're having equipment problems, don't go. It's just going to be safer to you know bite it and bite the cost and then try it again another time. So being willing to make that good no-go decision, no-go decision, and having some set decision points ahead of time is really important. And again, leaving that detailed trip plan with some trusted person so that if you don't make the check-in that you're supposed to, or something else, or you set off the PLB or the send device and we don't get a location, but we get an emergency notification, we can talk to that person and figure out what you're doing, where you're going to be. When I was talking to Rich yesterday, it sounds like maybe there'll be a presentation about the GAR. This is a risk calculation worksheet or tool, and we use that, but other agencies also use it. And it sounds like there may be some discussion about adapting that for some canyoning use, but it's a good thing to think about. Do you have the right kind of team leader or party leader that has the right qualifications or experience? Have you had time to plan the trip and make sure you got the appropriate equipment and things like that? What's the composition of the team? What's going on with the environment? If something bad were to happen, what is the complexity of something bad happening there? And then you can come up with this risk score, and you can just decide maybe we don't have the right complement of people, or the factors are not right in our favor, and we should hold off doing this. I mentioned that complacency or skill-based or complacency risk management tool. This was also developed by I think the same person, Craig Geis, from the California Training Institute. And we've used this to look at a bunch of different, either accidents or near misses. And the type of error can be calculated by looking at what the repetition times the confidence times experience. So if you had a really experienced group, you may have done this type of activity all the time, and you're very confident that nothing has gone wrong and nothing's gone wrong before. You don't think anything will go wrong this time, and you've done it for 10 or 15 years. When you multiply that out, you might get a look at it, that you might be at risk of a complacency error. if you had a really low score, it might just mean that you have low skill and maybe you need to get some more experienced people there. So having a mix of, of people is a good idea, but just thinking about even if you have really experienced people, just being aware that complacency is a latent hazard and taking the time to think through everything and not take any shortcuts is really important. And like Jamie and Ken have kind of mentioned, is the canyon emergency preparedness. These are things we think people should carry. I realize that weight is a premium when you're doing some canyoneering stuff and being able to move quickly. So these are just a few things we think are important. So carrying that send device or a PLB, that is probably really the only good way to get reliable communication out of the canyon. And just realizing that there's potential for delay in that message getting out. Then carrying some extra food, extra water, a first aid kit to take care of, little emergencies that might happen, some extra dry, warm clothing that you keep dry kind of at all costs so that if you get to a place where you have to get out and bivvy for a little bit, you can get out of a wetsuit and put on some dry clothing to reduce heat loss. Potentially a lightweight bivvy or some kind of heavy duty space blanket as a shelter option. Headlamp and a fire starting kit or a backpacking stove might be a good idea. And then some signaling equipment. So a whistle and maybe a strobe light so that if we're having trouble seeing from the air, it might be easier to see if you have some kind of strobe. A lot of headlamps have a strobe feature in it now anyway. And the whistle just is a little bit louder. If we have personnel trying to work through the canyon, they may be able to hear you. Or if you hear them, you can signal so we have a little bit easier time locating people. So how can you help us? I think the thing that is probably most important is if you're getting into this sport, make sure you get the appropriate training and have the appropriate equipment. Maybe get a good mentor. And if you are experienced, maybe you could be a good mentor for some people. If you have the experience and you're not already a part of a SAR team, think about joining the SAR team. We could always use people that have good canyoneering skills to join the team because these are complex operations, and having a robust team that's able to respond to those is pretty critical. Then, educating others, peer-to-peer education is really effective. So if you've learned some lessons, make sure you share that with other people. And then reporting accidents, if you had an accident or a near miss, to the International Canyon Accident Database. The incident and illusions with Ken and Jamie has been posted there, but it's a good resource to read about some canyon incidents, glean some lessons learned to build up your knowledge base for how you might respond to an incident, a similar incident. So with that, that's kind of what we want to present is about our operations here in Coconino County. My email address and Jamie's email address are there. If you have specific questions about our operations, we're happy to try to answer those, but we can also try to answer any questions that you might have right now.
Well, thank you so much for that. I feel very enlightened on all the inReach stuff and the complications and the GPS. So just going back to the good old fashioned, let the third party contact know the information. That's such a nice way, because if you do break your device and things like that, you have some backup. So it looks like there's a lively little discussion going on there with some questions. I don't know if you guys can see the questions from your side. I can read them to you. Otherwise we can have you just kind of scroll and answer them.
I'm trying to find the chat here. Sorry.
You have to push the button chat, but I'll read the first one while you're looking. So it says, question, I struggle to pick a good call out time for when to call out SAR if I do not show. What are some of the factors to consider to avoid a false negative or false positive SAR notification? What kind of balance does Coconino SAR prefer between early or late notifications of a delayed party?
Okay. We would like to know, I think the earlier notification we get is fine. If we'll start investigating the incident, and if we start the process and we locate the people like on the road coming out, and there was just a delay in getting communication out, that's fine for us. The earlier we know about it, the more time we have to plan and respond to the incident. So I would say if a canyoneering party is, an hour overdue and somebody reports it, that's fine with us. We're gonna start working on that case.
Good to know. So earlier the better, so you're not scrambling, it sounds like.
Yeah, we've had cases where people, think that in search and rescue, or you have to be missing for 24 hours for anybody will do anything. That's not the case. Once somebody's overdue, or they haven't made the check-in, or they've missed 2 check-ins or something like that, and you have some concern, you should just call, and then we can start working the different types of investigative resources we have on our end. We may be able to resolve the case in the investigation phase, or we might initiate a response, and then people come out and everything's fine. So
Some people delay calling because they think there's going to be a cost involved.
yeah, that's a good point. We've had people delay calling because they are concerned about the cost of a rescue. In Arizona and most of the West, for sure, there is no cost for search and rescue. The cost that might, come about from an incident, or if you're transported by private ambulance or air ambulance, there's cost to that. But the actual search and rescue component, there's no charge in Arizona.
Okay. The next question is, what number of SOS/emergency notifications are not responded to at all?
0. Like if we get an SOS or emergency notification, we are taking some action. So an example, it just happened yesterday. We got an Apple SOS message out of the Salt Canyon up in the Little Colorado River Gorge. I guess it happened on Sunday. We got one. We responded with a helicopter and ground personnel, got on scene, made contact with the party. They said that it was an accident. They didn't mean to do it. But we're going to if we tried to establish communications, we didn't. So we're going to treat every SOS as like, this is an emergency. We're going to start working the incident until we're comfortable ourselves that there's no emergency there. I've had a number of cases where somebody had a spot or a in reach, and they've told somebody, I'm not only going to use this if there's an emergency. And so somebody is out hiking, they push the check-in, like I'm okay, I'm checking in. And that person that gets the message said, I know that they told me they're only going to use this if there's an emergency. They've called us. They ask, we got this thing, it says I'm okay, but they said they were only going to use it, that maybe they pushed the wrong button. We tried to convince them that it's probably okay, but if they're really concerned, we'll respond to it. We've responded to those calls, located the group. They're like, I just checked in that I was okay. I was like, well, you just need to communicate how you're going to use this device. So that's a good point, is if you're having the send device and somebody else is going to be the recipient of those messages, you haven't discussed what the plan is, what kind of messages might they receive, what did they mean, so that they feel comfortable with when to call and when not to call.
That sounds great. I mean, it sounds a lot like just here, if you just call an ambulance, sometimes it's 911 is worth it. Sometimes it's an accident, but and especially in the wilderness setting, every minute and hour in a technical canyon really does count, because it's not like you can just show up really quickly. So that's that's good to know. The other question is from Patrick. He said he was in the party of Horse Tank, and he can't thank you and your team enough. Here's my question I never got to ask. We had an okay med kit, now mine is better, but we needed drugs, splints, bandage, and since we had multiple medically trained people in our group, myself included, would a Morse code app be useful for immediate communication with the helicopter? And would it drop a bag of supplies if asked via Morse code?
I think probably not many of us know Morse code anymore. I don't know that that's the best thing. I think that inReach was really important there. Some things we've done in the past, and we didn't do it on this case, but we have lowered a radio with some equipment down to the party, so that we could establish radio communications, and then we could get a little bit more assessment there. I think it would be very difficult for us to insert drugs just because of the rules involved there. So the paramedic on the helicopter is probably not going to want to send his drug bag down without knowing who's on scene there. But other supplies, that is possible. We've done that in the past, where we're able to put together a little survival package, insert it if we couldn't conduct a rescue immediately, and then you either drop off a radio or a note saying, this is our plan, stay here or do this. So that's a possibility. I did see one question right above that about Reco, and I don't know if any people know about Reco, but a lot of equipment, outdoor equipment, has Reco reflectors built in to the equipment. So I have a pair of Scarpa shoes has Reco reflectors. A lot of ski equipment has that. We are in the process of getting a new Reco detector. We hope to have that from Reco this fall, and we're looking into the possibility of getting a helicopter-based Reco set up for DPS. We're in the conversation with Reco about that. But we do have access to get a Reco detector right now from this Arizona Snow Bowl, which is right outside Flagstaff, and so that is a possibility. I don't know how that would work. We haven't tested that in the canyon environment. There's one other piece of gear that's out there that we did have a little experiment with. We're looking into is a detector for low power Bluetooth. So if people had AirTags or AirPods or something like that, there is some equipment that can detect low power Bluetooth, but we still have some work to do there to kind of validate that.
It looks like we have about 2 more questions, which is the perfect time. That wraps us up right about an hour. One from Kimberly. Did you see the one about drones? Says, are drones being deployed for canyon rescues? I can imagine in ways they would be helpful.
Yeah, we definitely have considered it. Being able to take a look in the area. Some of the challenges for us are when we're operating under Part 107 is maintaining visual line of sight with the aircraft. But we have considered that as an option, and we have drones in our unit that we could deploy. So it definitely is in the tool bag.
Perfect. And then Patrick from the horse tank rescue asks also, when you fire off the inReach ACR, is that location static or dynamic? I.e., should you get to a rescuable area first before pushing the button, or will it follow you if you decide to progress forward to a better location for the rescue of the patient?
It will follow you. So like the PLB, once you fire that off, the SARSAT constellation is monitoring, and so that signal is constantly hitting the SARSAT constellation and being relayed to for us in the continental United States, the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, and we're getting updated locations from the Air Force periodically as satellites pass over that. Same with the inReach or the Spot is those when you press the SOS. The nice thing, one of the nice things for the owner of the inReach, and one of the slightly annoying things for the rescue team, is that inReach is the government people are very persistent, and so they call like, what's the status? What's the status? And they're giving us updates about the location. Sometimes we have to inform them like, where these people are. It's going to take us a few hours to get to, and so we will contact you and let you know. But I think that's a really good thing actually from Garmin is they once you've set it off, they're paying attention to that and they're relaying information to us. And they're checking in with us about what is how is this rescue going?
No, that's really good to know because, Garmin has subscriptions to know that they follow up. So, and it looks like the last question we have from Paul is, can you touch more on what you mentioned regarding east-west canyons versus north-south canyons and inReach? You might have just talked about that in the satellites in those conditions. How would you have that knowledge help? I want to know which direction to hike to get better signal.
So like with the Iridium constellation, those are polar orbit satellites. So they're kind of orbiting in a line from pole to pole. And so if you can imagine if you're in a north-south oriented canyon, there's this, you might have more satellite time for that device to see the satellite. That doesn't mean that it's not going to work in an east-west canyon with an inReach or something. It's just like that. The visibility there might be just a smaller window of visibility. Globalstar has a different orbital plan. So I think the big thing to remember in these is like if you're in a tight canyon with limited sky view, you should, if you have an emergency, set it off, but realize that there may be a delay in that message getting out, and that may be a delay in a return message coming to you. And there may be a possibility that the emergency message gets out with no GPS. And that's why it's really important for that, the emergency contact to know what you're doing, what canyon you're going to be in, and those kind of things.
And then I think the last one is how do you know when you have a coordinate for the incident if it's a known canyoneering objective? They said cord, so I'm assuming it's coordinate. How can you know when you have a coordinate for the incident if it's a known canyoneering objective?
Well, if we get a notification like a PLB and we plot it, we look on the map, and we might try to look if oftentimes we'll know that these canyons are known canyoneering routes, and when we look at it, we're like, okay, this is probably a canyoneering incident. But we may also consult, different canyoneering guides or rope wiki or something like that to figure out, if it's somewhere where we have never been before, is this a canyoneering incident or a canyoneering route? But we would, like Jamie mentioned, we just have to be aware that the location, there may be some it's maybe less than precise if there's in a canyoneering situation where we might have multipathing. So we might know that this is the canyon. It just might not be, within 5 meters. We might be several, 50 or 100 meters one way or the other in there. So that's the challenge for us, is once we get the coordinates, is being able to actually locate and know kind of, are you between rappel 6 and 7, or you're somewhere else, and that impacts how we might be able to make access.
No, this has been super helpful, really bringing it back to the importance of before there was any of this, or even a spot device to let somebody know where you go, and then a map and things, because technology fails or it takes too long. And just bringing it back a little bit old school while you complement the technology. We can't just rely on technology. That's why we bring maps into canyons too. So this has been great. Thank you so much. We've had a lot of engagement. People have stayed on. So really good information. This will be posted on YouTube as a replay. And just a reminder, if you go to our website, the Coalition of American Canyoneers.org, sign up as a member for free. We're going to be doing different presentations. We have one coming up on friction and rappel devices, as well as safety tethers and all kinds of things. So join now and then scooch over and grab yourself a fall hoodie, and support agencies in different counties of SAR, because that's what the Coalition of American Canyoneers want to keep access and work with their land managers to make sure everybody can safely access the canyons and support the SAR team. So thank you so much again. This has been so great. Really appreciate your time. This was their time to be here. It was complimentary. So we really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to the coalition. We've received some support from the coalition in the past to help us with some training and some other canyoneering incidents around our county. So we appreciate the support.
Yep, and everything that we do, every shirt goes right to support. So that's what's really great about that, is to go directly to the agencies and where it's needed. So thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you at the next one.